What would you do if all your text messages and phone calls in the last year fell into the hands of the police who were convinced you were part of a criminal gang? Would you be worried at all? You might think, what's there to be worried about? I'm not in a gang, and that's A-okay. Give them the green light. Except, have you ever at any point referred to haters? Have you ever called people you don't like or who don't like you ops? If you've played video games online anytime between now and like 2014, chances are you probably have. What about discussing being on that grind set? Or worse, calling that trapping? Have you ever referred to anybody as cuz, including your actual cousin? What about fam? Oh, and remember I said A-okay and green light like 15 seconds ago? Well, according to one gang slang glossary, that's always out killing. This is a gang hand sign, and green light is permission to murder. I'm giving a guest lecture at Georgetown. It'll probably already have happened by the time this video is released. And I was invited to speak about my 2019 co-authored paper, Testifying While Black, where we demonstrated that court transcriptionists don't always correctly transcribe Black English. More precisely, they do not meet their certification standard of 95% accuracy, and they consistently change crucial information like who, what, when, and where. And what they write, regardless of what you said, becomes the legal fact of what was said. So the court record might actually say, he's bindling me, and you can be asked to explain that in cross-examination, and if you can't explain it, you look inconsistent or dishonest. Does it matter that the actual sentence you said was, Ben don't eat meat, because you went vegan 10 years ago? Not in the slightest. It's not just the court transcriptionists who struggle with the basics of Black English. It's also judges, lawyers, including defense lawyers, and police officers. In the paper, we discussed some shocking incidents in real courtrooms, including the trial where a man was denied legal counsel because he said, "Let me get a lawyer, dog," and it was determined that he had fancifully requested canine legal counsel. Or the case where an appeal was decided by a judge going to Urban Dictionary, like Wikipedia in that it can be edited at any time by anybody, but also in many ways much worse than Wikipedia, to determine the meaning of, he finna shoot me. The judge claimed that finna wasn't a real word, and because there was no tensed form of the verb to be, it was impossible to determine whether it was an admissible utterance. And I thought those were bad. But since that paper was published, I've done a fair amount of expert witness work, and what I've learned has been genuinely alarming. And you need to know. Today, we're going to discuss law enforcement gang slang experts. There's an entire industry of beat cops, detectives, federal agents, you name it, claiming expertise in criminal slang. But their expertise is made up and their credentials are meaningless. And this is a very real danger for everybody, but especially the kinds of people who are most likely to come into contact with the criminal justice system and who are most likely to be assumed to be gang members. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones, and this is Language Jones. Disclaimer, for the cops out there, I just want to point out that I'm not in any way anti-law enforcement. I have very close friends who are career law enforcement, from beat cops to executive protection and counter-strikers. I work volunteer security with law enforcement and former law enforcement, and I even went and did the NYPD Citizens Police Academy. I appreciate the danger first responders routinely face, and I know firsthand how drug dealers, gang members, and violent criminals can ruin lives and wreak havoc on a community. I want to see the bad guys behind bars as much as you do. I think civilians should all have to experience a shoot, don't shoot decision like the TI training simulator before they say anything about use of force. But I also want you to do your job well. That's part of what it means to back the blue. You're called to a higher standard. And when it comes to language, law enforcement very often fails to meet the absolute minimum standard of evidence. If this isn't you, great. Bring some of this back to your colleagues who need it. Civilians who don't like that I said that, do you want the cops to watch it or not? So there's a few things I need to get out of the way first that are counterintuitive and go against the grain of what a lot of us were taught explicitly in English class, but that you probably already know if you've ever watched my channel before. First, Black English, African American English, Ebonics, whatever you want to call it, is a distinct language variety. It's not the same as classroom English. Importantly, it's not trying to be classroom English and failing. It's a language variety with its own highly systematic structure that just happens to be distinct from what we think of as the standard. I'm not saying bad English or broken English doesn't exist. I'm saying this ain't it. It's what linguists call asymmetrically mutually intelligible when talking about languages like Danish and Swedish or Spanish and Portuguese. Portuguese speakers understand Spanish pretty well, but it really doesn't go the other direction. Think like Scots English, for instance. Point is, it's its own thing, but it's not always understood, and to make matters worse, lots of people mistakenly think that it doesn't exist and is just a failed attempt at standard English, so they never bother to even try to figure out what's happening because they think there's nothing to figure out. Some of those people will leave angry comments on this very video. So, speakers can be misunderstood. This happens in a few different ways. First is phonetic. The sound patterns are consistent, but different from other kinds of English. For instance, word final S can be deleted. It can be deleted in verbs like he run. It can be deleted in plurals like a pair of glove. And it can be deleted in possessive constructions like baby mama. Some of you are just now realizing that the term baby mama is literally just baby's mama in Black English, completely synonymous with my child mama. That is, the mother of my child, not a teen pregnancy. That's one example. The chapter on phonology and the descriptive grammar of Black English that I'm currently co-authoring with Hiram Smith and with DeAndre Esprit Conaway is already like 20 pages, single-spaced, small font, and we haven't even finished populating all the examples yet. This stuff adds up. By the way, if you'd like to know more about the book and get updates when it becomes available, you can leave an email at www.languagejones.com/AGOBE for a grammar of Black English. You might not think this stuff could be easily misunderstood, but you'd be wrong. I once worked as an expert witness where law enforcement used text messages in a group chat as evidence. I've done a ton of those. There was a guy who went by Showtime, and his little brother said something in the chat. Somebody asked, "Who dat?" and somebody else replied, "Showtime, little brother." All this, the street names, the relationships, were known to law enforcement, the defense lawyers, and the prosecution. But instead of correctly interpreting the text as "that's Showtime's little brother," who it was, they claimed it was a vague call to violence. "It's Showtime, my little brother." Black English also has a different syntax, that is, different grammar rules, including more tenses in the non-specialist sense, than classroom English. So, he don't be in that neighborhood is not the same as he isn't in that neighborhood right now. It means he's not usually in that neighborhood, but given the right context, he could literally be in that neighborhood right now and also not be in that neighborhood on the regular. There's a handful of these with names like habitual be, stressed been, preterite had, that have been very, very well studied in the academic linguistic literature for decades. Then you have lexical differences, that is, words. That's stuff like kitchen, which is not the place you cook food, or ashy, which doesn't refer to the fireplace, but could describe your kitchen if you got like psoriasis or something. And what's important is I don't mean slang and I don't mean code words, just regular ass words. Words like sedity. You went to the city and got so sedity. Or Rudy poo.
Rudy poo can the
Was a Rudy toot, a nick and poo.
A heifer. If you want to understand how phonetics, phonology, syntax, and word meanings all work in language, not just one language, but all of them, I'm launching a self-paced digital course later this year called The Language Blueprint. If you want to know more or sign up for updates, head over to www.languagejones.com/blueprint. Okay, so not only can it be misunderstood because the sounds are different and the grammar is different and some of the words are different or are used differently, but there's also a whole social element. All of that stuff was what's called language internal factors, but the external factors are social. Those include expecting criminality from a speaker, expecting disrespect, thinking that Black English is just slang, and so on. In the paper I co-authored in 2019 that looked at court transcriptionists, we found that some of their misunderstandings came from assuming criminality. Remember that S dropping? The sentence, "Did his wife friend call?" became, "Did his white friend come?" in one transcript. And when asked to explain, the transcriptionist wrote that the speaker was asking whether somebody brought cocaine. So if Black English isn't slang, we should probably define what is. Regardless which dictionary you use, you're going to get a definition that combines two elements. First, it's informal and chiefly spoken. Not always. And second, it's restricted to an in-group, like an argot, a secret vocabulary for a particular group. Criminal slang is then a secret in-group vocabulary for, well, criminals. One problem this poses is that criminal is a somewhat porous category, and many of us have some manner of social intercourse with criminals of some variety on a daily basis. Not to mention the fact that lots of in-group slang gets picked up and used by the out-group to gain what's referred to in the academic literature and linguistics as covert prestige. You use it to sound cool, by association. It's also notoriously difficult to pin down. For instance, replacing syllable codas with izzy or izzle. Is that children's language games like Ig Pay Attenlay or Double Dutch? Is it criminal slang when the word is Glock and you say glizzy? What about when the extended magazine for a Glock gets called a glizzy, but then, by analogy, a totally normal thing languages do all the time, it comes to mean a Frankfurter hot dog? It sounds ridiculous, but linguists really do spend time thinking about what the difference is between a glizzy and a weenie. Both have hypochoristic suffixes, but one comes from the name of the city of Vienna. You know, like a Frankfurter, a Frankfizzle. So how would you go about proving you were talking about grabbing a hot dog from the dirty water dog peddler on the corner and not going home for an automatic weapon if you were on the stand? Would you still be reeling from, what the fuck is even happening? And that brings me to the point that I want to make. Lexicography is hard. Lexicography is a skill acquired through serious training, and law enforcement engage in speculative, amateur lexicography and consistently get away with testifying about the quote-unquote real meanings of words despite very often having less than no idea what they're talking about. Lexicography is what dictionary makers do. It's the science, and to a certain extent art, of identifying head words, corresponding lexical units, and then engaging in the extremely difficult task of word sense disambiguation, WSD. It's an empirical science. You can't just declare that a word has thus and such definition by fiat. And you can't appeal to the etymological fallacy and claim that it means what an older version of it once did. A big weenie is not necessarily a hot dog from Vienna. There are entire books dedicated to teaching the skill of lexicography. I know because I have a few of them, and they're dense, hard work, and sometimes take opposite positions. Any lexicographer should be able to say what their overall approach to the scientific study of meaning, lexical semantics, is. Lexicographers use corpora, the bigger the better. That's the plural of corpus, by the way. It just means a collection, or literally a body of material, like Google Books, or the entire history of the New York Times, or even, in theory, 1,000 pages of intercepted text messages. In those corpora, they identify head words and attempt to group into different senses and uses using part-of-speech tagging, collocations, what other words appear with this word, are they obligatory, and so on. It's not only an incredibly challenging and time-consuming task, but very frequently you find that your assumptions about what a word means or how it's used have to be reevaluated when they run up against actual data. Perhaps unsurprisingly, police almost never receive training in linguistics, lexicography, or lexical semantics. I've never heard of a single case. Instead, they receive unsourced hand-me-down guides that make authoritative claims with no supporting evidence. They receive training from other officers, who in turn have no training in linguistics or lexicography, often in the form of a glossary of words ostensibly decoding criminal slang, like a Dick Tracy detective ring. They compile their own ad hoc glossaries from their experiences working as a police officer, whether undercover, from wiretaps, or just interacting with people in the course of their duties. And instead of using an empirical scientific approach, gathering data, analyzing it, formulating hypotheses, and then testing those hypotheses to attempt to disprove them, officers frequently rely on motivated reasoning. When you rely on motivated reasoning while in a RICO case, everything becomes criminal. I mean, everything, to a farcical degree. Don't believe me? Here's a body language guide for Virginia State Police that ascribes criminal meaning to everything from scratching your forehead to rubbing your ear to literally blinking. Think about what it means for official documentation from agents of the state to declare that an autonomous bodily function is criminal code inquiring about a weapon. Words like fam, blood, cuz, damu, and homie get represented as indicators of gang membership. Could they be? Some of them, sometimes. But cuz isn't just used by Crips, it's also used by actual cousins. One case I worked as an expert witness on had law enforcement draw up RICO charges on actual relatives, and the evidence for conspiracy was partially their use of terms like fam and cousin to refer to their actual cousins. Hilariously, they were purported to be bloods, and the evidence adduced to support that assertion in one case was the use of ostensibly Crip slang. And homie? Linguist Geneva Smitherman demonstrated as far back as the 1990s that it's a general term for a friend or peer that came from a term for black people, specifically that came from a term for the Deep South, the home. It's left as an exercise for the viewer to determine why homies are criminalized in the US, but a Hamish Amamala isn't, at least not anymore. Damu could be gang-related, it means blood after all, but is the use of the Swahili term criminal jargon indicating membership in the Bloods, or is it Pan-African black nationalist political identity and using a kinship term as a social honorific? There's not a right answer in the abstract, but a good lexicographer can tell you from the context which one it is, and importantly, how they know. And law enforcement officers should be able to do that rather than state all uses of the word damu are inherently criminal. Is my citation of it criminal right now? One that keeps coming up is the use of terms to obfuscate. So for example, food doesn't mean food, it really means heroin or cocaine or whatever. So, okay, how do you know? How can you demonstrate that from sentence context, collocations, part of speech, real-world context? If somebody says they're going to go home and get some food and then you observe them go to a trap house and secure heroin, you've got a form of linguistic evidence there. If they go home and get heroin and Chinese food, that's less solid. And what if they get a sandwich and a blunt? Again, this sounds like silly nitpicking, but the difference between procuring heroin for distribution and smoking your own marijuana at home is a big difference in the outcomes in the legal system. And on top of the problem of motivated reasoning, there's the problem of culture. Specifically, what is actually obfuscation and how do you know? There's lots of ways of talking about this in the anthropology, sociology, and even organizational behavior literature, but I like to follow Hall, I think it's 1972, and frame things in terms of direct and indirect communication and high and low context communication. That is a whole topic for a future video, but the short version is that it's too bright in here for me to see my screen. Go turn the lights off is low context and direct. You explain background rather than assuming it. That's the low context part. And you state what you want using a speech act that lines up with the intended effect. In this case, a request in the form of, well, a request. The lighting in here is a little harsh, don't you think? Is high context and indirect, in part because it's using a question to effect a command. And that's before we even get to face-saving strategies, following Brown and Levinson's classic work, Politeness, where I might opt to say, you might strain your eyes reading in this light, feigning concern for you in order to effect my goal. I bring all of this up because there's a mountain of evidence in the academic literature that Black American communities often skew toward valuing high context, not spelling everything out explicitly, indirectness, and face-saving strategies. There are lots of historical and sociological reasons we don't need to get into, and there are plenty of people who don't fall into this generalization, but the important takeaway is that it runs counter to both the personality and preferences that are common in the kinds of people who choose to become a cop anyway. And those are amplified by their training and indoctrination on the force. Neither is right or wrong, but the question becomes, how can you tell obfuscation versus politeness in a different cultural context? I can't tell you how many texts I have from friends that say something like, saw your girl at the spot. That's not secrecy to confuse the police in the event they get all our texts. That is a cultural default where it's expected I can recover he meant I saw, who your girl refers to from recent context, and where the spot is. And this is important. The spot is not one fixed place, nor is your girl one fixed person. It's contextual. Now, all of this stuff is generally easily explainable. In some cases, the police assertions I've seen have actually been correct. But a real expert can actually explain their approach to lexical semantics, their approach to teasing apart illocution and perlocution, their approach to ambiguity and context and all the things that make up pragmatics. And instead, what often happens is appeal to authority rather than meeting basic standards of evidence. And that appeal to authority is combined with ignorance of the basics of the dialect people speak and its cultural norms, and an inability to accurately parse sentences, and a belief that everything is evidence of criminality. I want to be absolutely clear, the reason this is a problem is not that law enforcement is inherently bad. That's a different argument for a different kind of channel. The problem is that their training doesn't line up with the job, and they have a false feeling of expertise that leads to incompetent overconfidence. Sorry. And it can, and absolutely does, harm real people who in many cases may well be innocent of what they're charged with. I want you guys to get the bad guys, but leave the rest of us out of it. And the way to do that with criminal slang is to actually be able to intelligently discuss phonetics, phonology, syntax, lexical semantics, pragmatics, culture, and demonstrate correctly that something actually is slang, actually is criminal, and actually means what you say it means in both illocution and perlocutionary effect. By the way, is illocution taken as an MC name? Asking for a friend. Honestly, if a police department wanted to do this right and stop wasting their time railroading regular people who, let me check my notes, have families, eat food, and blink, I'd be more than happy to help. They just never ask me. And if you made it this far and you want to know more about how language works, don't forget to head to www.languagejones.com/blueprint to get on the wait list for updates about the course. It's everything that you'd learn in Intro to Linguistics, but explained clearer, a whole lot cheaper, and a whole lot more fun. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you can support it on YouTube with super thanks or over on Patreon at patreon.com/languagejones. Please leave a comment, they're great for the algorithm, and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, stay safe out there and happy learning.